I can.
You're coming in loud and clear.
Great. I want to make sure everyone on YouTube can hear me as well.
Uh,
Yes, they can. I just turned it on and I heard that it is delayed, but I can hear you.
Awesome. Okay, I got the thumbs up from YouTube. Everyone can hear me. Okay, let's get started. This is something I've been wanting to do for a long time because it is in the forefront. This is what we're battling. This is the origins of what it is we're battling. We're battling something new. It's quite literally called neo-Marxism. But this is the foundation. This is the economic, the classical Marxism uh, philosophy that I'm going to cover here. Um, so it's an introduction to Marxism, socialism, and communism. And yes, all three of those things are different things. They're not interchangeable, they're not swappable. These words mean things, and I want to make sure that the accuracy of the definitions of these words are known by all of us because we can no longer be ignorant about this stuff. We need to get this stuff straight so that when we're engaging with the left, wherever that is, in the next space, on the streets, wherever, even between our family members, we talk as though we know what we're talking about. And that's really important because the people you're going to converse with, they've been studying this stuff for years. They know our philosophy very, very well because they're against it. So they've studied their enemy. And this is our opportunity to do the same. So let's go ahead and get started. I want to get covered the agenda here. So I'm going to break it down in very simple segmented parts. So they go together in the order, but also they're all each their own separate thing, and we can cover them one by one. So it's not as intimidating as it looks. So what is Marxism? So Marxism, and we're going to get into this later in more depth, but he believed in something called historical or sometimes called dialectical materialism. So basically, what that means is that Marx posited the theory that history itself progresses through material means. The aggregation of it, the consolidation of it, the distribution of it, that's how history itself progresses. That is the philosophy of Marxism. So, Marxism is we move history by moving stuff. It's a very simplistic, very flat uh, definition. It's a quick definition of Marxism, but that's what it is at its core. Now, socialism, we're going to go over that because it is a theoretical temporary state between capitalism and communism. And socialism is not the same as communism. They're not interchangeable either. They mean two very different things. So we're going to go over those both and clearly define what it is these things are, as well as what they are not. So I think it's very important to cover him pretty soon. Unfortunately, you cannot understand Marx and where he's coming from and why he thinks history progresses through these material means. You can't understand that reasoning, that axiom he's operating off of, without understanding Hegel first, because Marx himself was Hegelianism split into two. You had the old Hegelians and then you had the young Hegelians, and that is what Marx was. He was a young Hegelian. All right. So next thing are going to be definitions. These are things that are important to establish before we're even able to understand the words that we're using. So I went briefly over Marxism at the beginning. It is the belief that I'll just read it. Socioeconomic analysis focusing on class relations and societal conflict using material interpretation. So basically what I said, history progresses through material. Socialism. Socialism is an economic system characterized by social ownership and democratic control of production. Now, when we see the word democratic, okay, a liberal, a communist, and a fascist are going to interpret the word democratic completely differently. They're going to use the same words, but we're going to arrive at different definitions of what the word democratic means. So when a socialist uses the word democratic, they mean a direct democracy, right? They don't, for example, socialists hate the electoral college because they don't like that we are a system of representation. They hate that. They think that that is not only uh, wrong, but it's also like morally wrong. And we'll get into that a little bit later on. So socialism is the seizure of the means of production. I'll give you an example. Venezuela is very, very rich until the government seized the means of oil production in that country. And the reason why it goes south so quickly is because the prices of the commodities that the government seizes is not subject to open markets. So it becomes incredibly difficult to deduce the price of what a thing should be, because when you have a market, it tells you what people are willing to pay for it, what the market is willing to bear, and that's how much it is. So with when you seize the means of production, you basically inflate it, and it becomes alienating from the people who are trying to buy that commodity. It's either very strict, very expensive, and it doesn't care what the market or the demand is. Um, so that is socialism. Communism, when you're talking to a leftist or an actual like full-blown communist, and they tell you that communism has never been tried, they're actually correct, but for the wrong reason. They're incorrect, or I'm sorry, they are correct because communism is a theoretical place. It has never happened. There has never been a classless nor stateless society where everything is publicly traded and everything is uh, redistributed by needs. There is no you cannot prove communism empirically because it's never happened. So when they say that communism's never been tried, well, I mean it has been tried, but it's never happened. And we'll get into why that is. The state formed under socialism, it just never goes to the next stage, which is communism. So the next word is capital. So capital is just anything that generates wealth. And for the communist, property is inextricable from capital. So that's why they are so bent on eliminating private property, because that's what they believe to make capital itself. To them, they're synonymous. Property, capital. Um, and so let's go into proletariat. The proletariat is the working class, the workers, the people who are employed to be on the factory floor, building those widgets, putting in the screws. Though that's the proletariat. Pretty simple concept. And then the bourgeoisie is the people who own the means of production. They are the capitalists. So bourgeoisie is just Marx's way of saying liberal capitalism. You can replace bourgeoisie with liberal capitalism, and it will read no differently. So we're going to go into the struggle between those two things. And I do want to mention that, so these words are French. And it's escaped me. I should have done this before. Proletariat just means like the workers, the mass, the I think just the workers. Bourgeoisie comes from a word called the bourge, and bourge in French just means town folk. That's where the rich and the property owners and the business owners tend to congregate, is in cities. So the bourge were, middle upper class people that had their own businesses and they were productive. They were entrepreneurs. That's the bourgeoisie. So just think of the bourgeoisie as the people who own capital. They own private property. A materialism. This is very important to understanding Marx's philosophy itself, because in the 21st century North American context, when we say, oh yeah, that person's a materialist, that just means they like to buy a lot of stuff. Okay, materialism, we're dealing with the philosophy of materialism, which is not that understanding at all. What it is the belief that there is nothing but matter. There is no spirituality, there is no God, there is only matter. And the only thing that matters when all there is matter is the aggregation and the redistribution of matter. So the movement of material, again, going back to Marx's philosophy of historical Marxism, or I'm sorry, historical materialism, is this movement of matter is what is progressing history. It's what's getting us to the eventuality that we're seeking, which is communism. So materialism is the philosophy that all that there is physical matter. And then the last is the most complex out of all of these, the dialectic. Um, if you've heard anything about Hegel, you have heard the dialectic, because that was his tool that he was using to drive history forward. And you're going to see this parallel between Hegel and Marx with this just obsession with progressing history forward and doing what they believe to uh, further or to help that progression along. That's why Marx, he was a or I'm sorry, a young Hegelian, but he broke off. Actually, he flipped Hegel. And actually, on that note, we're going to go to the next slide. So this is Hegel, and I'm not even going to try and pronounce his name. I think it's Jorge. I'm not great with German. So who is Hegel? Hegel was he's one of the probably actually the most influential thinker of the 19th century. He wrote his kind of magnum opus was he wrote it after the French Revolution. It was called Phenomenology of Spirit. So you're going to see this word spirit and Geist a lot, because Hegel believed that history was it had a purpose. So when you were trying to understand the purpose of something, that's called teleology. So he was a historical teleologist, where he's trying to actually understand what the purpose of history was, which is a huge task. And I guess let me explain a little bit more what teleology is, just so we understand what Hegel was trying to do with history with teleology. So teleology is when you're trying to understand the purpose of something by studying it. So an extrinsic version of that would be a fork, for example, something made by someone else outside of you, therefore it's extrinsic. So you look at a fork, right? You look at the shape that it is, you look at the size, you look at how it's kind of contoured. And so even if you had never seen a fork before, eventually by studying its design, you can deduce its purpose. That's teleology. So, but rather than doing that with a fork, Hegel was doing that with history, the history of mankind. Hegel was trying to figure out why we're here and what we're all doing this for, what this whole game is about, this whole nations conquering other nations, people migrating, different religions and different belief systems. He believed all that was necessary, doing this kind of push and pull that was propelling history forward. So one of the biggest, most influential example of this happening to Hegel was the French Revolution. So the French Revolution happened in 1798. Phenomenology of Spirit by Hegel came out in 1907, and he was inspired by it, and he called it what do you call it, like true liberation. These people were liberating themselves from the feudalism and the monarchies and the church. And we all know how that went. So let me get back on point here. Let me stick to these bullet points. So the Hegelian dialectic, right? So I covered briefly that Hegel believes that these struggles between different nations and different countries and peoples, that's necessary to drive history forward. And he called this process the dialectic. So it has three stages, right? You have the thesis. Let's just say you have a country that is expanding. It's imperialistic. It's trying to spread its influence. But then you have another country that's also trying to do the same thing. It's antithesis. It's opposite. Well, those two countries need to go to war and fight that out. Whoever is the victor, they develop a new understanding of not production, but it's the new the wheel has made a revolution. The history has been pushed forward by this conflict. Now, Hegel didn't just deal with real world material conflict. He also dealt, actually, mostly primarily because he was an idealist, he dealt mainly with the mind, or what he called the Geist. And the best way to understand Geist is just mind. And when he says that, he's not talking about your mind or my mind or his mind. He's talking about the totality of human consciousness on the planet and our understandings and our how we conceive reality and how these conceptions that we have are constantly evolving, and they're moving us towards something which he called absolute. So the philosophy of Hegel is called absolute idealism. An idealist, classical German idealist, believes that the mind quite literally creates reality. So, because we're experiencing the world through our mind, ultimately it's our mind that defines reality. Um, and if you want to understand, like, how could anyone ever believe that? Well, the transgender movement is just like that. That's an idealist philosophy. The transgender. I believe that gender can be swappable, and I'm going to force reality to contour to that idealism. So that is a very far, great grandchild of German idealism, but it's the same principle. The idea that what is in my mind, I can make that come about because reality is just a product of the mind. So that's what idealism is. So Hegel is an absolute idealist. So he believed that the mind is creating reality. The mind is constantly, because of these conflicts and these contradictions that we have, and they're warring themselves out, which he called the dialectic. That is the engine that is propelling Geist or mind forward, and that's what he believed. And if you want to think of an example of like how is it that a global or global consciousness is moving forward and understanding? Well, we there was a time when we thought that the Earth was the center of the universe. Well, then at some point, Hegel would argue, well, Geist then proceeded forward and it gained new understanding that no, we're actually not the center of the universe. In fact, we orbit something else. So Hegel is using that kind of uh, mind spirit Geist understanding of the man and the world around him and how he experienced things. That's the thing that he's trying to get to its conclusion, which he called the absolute. The absolute is the point at which a man he no longer has any internal conflicts, and he has accepted that the mind creates reality, and that this point is an inevitability of this dialectical process, that it will eventually get to a point, a conclusion, or a quote end of history, but in the conscious, in the mind. Um, so it's important to understand that Hegel was very much in the realm of the mind, or Geist or spirit. Marx was not. Marx didn't. He didn't. This is where he disagreed with Hegel. He didn't believe in this, that the mind, that human consciousness is what is moving forward. No. It's actually material. So Marx, he famously quoted that he stood Hegel on his head. He flipped him. Instead of the mind and ideas and thought, we're going to go into the hard material. So the exact opposite. So that's why he can say he flipped Hegel on his head. Um, that's what he means by that. So he kept the dialectical process, however. He kept this idea that, yeah, history does move forward through this process of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. However, what does that, though, is the economy, and modes of production. Because, again, he believes material is what's driving us forward. So, well, what makes material? Well, people, the workers. So hopefully that's kind of connecting those dots to you on how Marx is getting from Hegel's idealism, and he's turning it into his own kind of materialist idealism. He doesn't depart entirely from idealism, because if you understand communism to be a theoretical place that is not dependent on empirical data to prove, it is an idealist concept. Communism is idealism. Um, at its core. So Marx, it's like he can't make a choice. Is he a materialist, or is he an idealist, or does he believe that the material leads to the ideal? You know, um, that's something that I would love to know, and maybe someone does know that. All right, so I'm just making sure we're gonna hit this nail on the head so that we get this down, because these are very important things to know. So what Marxism is not, right? Marxism is not when the government does things. Okay, taxation, that is not Marxism. Maintaining the welfare programs and public infrastructure, that also is not Marxism. Equal pay is also not Marxism, because Marx does not believe he believes currency to be necessary only through the stage of socialism, but in communism um, there is no currency, because everything that people need is determined based off of their needs and not for profit. So Marxism is not equal pay. Um, it's not. It's also not a social democracy. So you'll hear people talk about the Scandinavian countries like Sweden and Norway and Finland, how those are socialist countries. No, they're not. They are social democracies. And what a social democracy is it just has basically uh, more robust safety nets for people. Like, you may have free education, you may have free healthcare to a point that the population and its economy can bear. So that is what those countries are. They are mixed economies. They are definitely capitalistic in that they have private businesses which generate capital, which they own private property. So the Sweden, the Norway, the Scandinavian model is not socialism. So anyone that thinks that, you know how to shut them down now. You now know the difference between, for example, democratic socialism and social democracy. They are not the same thing. So I know I went over this kind of prematurely, but what Marxism is, it is historical materialism. It is the theory that society's economic structures and material resources are the primary drivers of human history through class struggle. So he believes, like I said, history is propelled forward by this material struggle, these warring factions. And what is that class struggle? Human history through the lens of class, specifically identifying an ongoing conflict. He uses the word struggle a lot between the bourgeoisie, the haves, and the proletariat. Well, theoretical haves and theoretical have-nots. So his answer to that, though, is the abolition of private property, the overthrow of the capitalist system. They don't want a representative democracy; they want a direct democracy, and they want to abolish private property, because through that transitionary state of socialism, we'll eventually get to communism. So that is what Marxism is and is not. So I do want to read the opening. This is the very first line, with the exception of the foreword that Marx, he makes his own foreword on his own book. But this is the first official, under the title bourgeoisie and proletarians, because the Communist Manifesto is divided up into three parts. The first is called the bourgeoisie and the proletarian. So in this first part of the Communist Manifesto, he's setting the stage. He's setting up what the conflict is and why they're conflicting. But he starts off kind of snarky here, because he says, a specter is haunting Europe, the specter of communism. So this opening line already, he is saying, well, communism already exists. It's already around us. It's in every country. It's the workers yearning for them to own the means of production themselves. They're tired of being exploited. So that's what he's saying here, that the specter of communism, it's already here, and everyone's scared of it. So all the powers of old Europe have entered into a holy alliance to exercise this specter. The Pope, the Tsar, I'm not going to try and pronounce those things, Metternich and Guizot, French radicals and German police spies. So he's just saying, there's this kind of unspoken agreement that all these different powers have to kind of uh, resist communism, which is this ghost that is haunting them. So that's his opening line there. So he goes on, where is the party in opposition that has not decried a communistic by its opponents in power? So he's saying all these different nations, they're just throwing around the word communist, and they're using it as a pejorative. Oh, you're a communist. So that's what he's saying there. Where's the opposition that has not hurled back the branding reproach of communism? against the more advanced opposition parties, as well as against its reactionary adversaries. Reactionaries, so we have to, I should have made a definition of the word reactionary. So what Marx actually, his philosophy is in reaction to liberalism. So liberalism's been around since 1690, and was really implemented in like in earnest in like the early 19th century, like I think like 1820. Um, but Marx would argue that it has been around since the French Revolution. Um, so he says the people who are reacting against his reaction to liberalism and capitalism, they're the reactionaries. And he does this very subtly. So you'll hear communists use that word a lot to describe what they'll call neoliberals. They'll describe them as reactionaries, when in reality it was Marx developing a philosophy in reaction to capitalism and liberalism. So there's the irony there. So he's saying it's reactionary adversaries. They're reacting to the specter of communism. That's what he's saying. They're the ones reacting, not us. So two things result from this fact that he just established. Communism is already acknowledged. All European power is to be a power itself, or itself be a power. Like we said, his argument is they all know what communism is. They all know it's like all around us. We can't get rid of it. And then number two, he says it's high time that the communists should openly no longer be a spirit, no longer be a Geist, but to openly consolidate. He says he makes the argument here. In the face of the whole world, publish their views, their aims, their tendencies, and meet this nursery tale of the specter of communism with a manifesto of the party itself. So if you look at the title and it says the Manifesto of the Communist Party, this is a political, it's not a philosophical, though there is a tremendous amount of overlap, because sometimes you'll hear communists argue, the Communist Manifesto, that's just for the party. That's not for the politics. I'm sorry, that's not for the like the beliefs and the philosophy. And they are pedantically correct, but they're ignoring that. I mean, what is being said in the party and what is being said by Marx himself outside of the party, there's like an 85-90% overlap. Um, so that's another thing that you can throw back in communists' faces when they're just like, oh no, that's just the Communist Party. It's all one big soup. It's all one ideological soup. And if you look at the subheading, the Communist Confession of Faith. What is that? So before it was called the Communist Manifesto of the Communist Party, it was called the Communist Confession of Faith. And why that is on the next slide. So after this forward, in earnest, the Communist Manifesto starts, and he has to set the groundwork for what it is he believes, this class struggle. And he does so by just asserting that the history of all hitherto existing societies, so every society that has ever been, is the history of class struggle. So he's saying that since the beginning of time, there has always been this class struggle. It's always been there. That's what he's saying. So it is a leap of faith in that he's getting you, this is his opening, this is his equivalent of in the beginning, God made the heavens and the earth. It's axiomatic, and it sets up as the foundation upon which everything else is built, just as it is in the Bible when God made the heavens and the earth. If you didn't know that there's two different places that exist, you really can't understand the rest of the Bible, right? So this is his leap of faith that he's asking you to take. For you to understand anything about Marxism, you need to understand what it is he's saying, and you need to believe it. So society as a whole is more and more splitting up into two great hostile camps, into two great classes directly facing one another. Again, he's also asserting the belief that they've always been in direct conflict with one another, that it's always been that way. And he calls them the bourgeoisie, the town folk, the liberal capitalists, and the proletariat, the workers, the people on the actual conveyor belt, putting in the screws in the widget or whatever. That's what he's dividing the world into, and he's asking you to to believe that with him, so that everything else that he says makes sense. So, what is his main issue with capitalism? We know that he doesn't like private property. He knows that or we know that he believes that capital, the generation of money, of wealth, is inextricable from property. But why? Why does he think that? Well, so he believes capitalism. I'll just read it here. So society, and again, this is 1848 or 1847 when he's writing this. Suddenly, society finds itself put back into a state of momentary barbarism. What is he talking about here? He's talking about feudalism. He's talking about monarchies, and you had the nobility, you had the aristocracy, and all the way down to the peasant. That's what he's calling barbarism in this context. And why? Because there's too much civilization, too much means of substance, too much industry, too much commerce. What he's saying is capitalism is it's just producing. It is just producing like mad, and it's generating a lot of wealth, but it's coming at a price. It's almost as if it's producing just to produce, and that is immiserating the workers, the people that are being forced. Well, because he uses it as exploitation, being forced to basically maintain this machine of capitalism for the sake of just keeping capitalism going. And the more capitalism goes on, the bigger the divide between the rich and the poor. That's his argument. Next slide. So I touched on the French Revolution and the state of barbarism that he's talking about. So he believed that it was the bourgeoisie, the business owners, the townsfolk who were being who were under the aristocracy, under the king, under the monarchy, feudalism. Those private business owners, they were the ones that overthrew feudalism. So he viewed the bourgeoisie and capitalism as a necessary state to overthrow feudalism. Feudalism had to go. By the end of the 18th century, it became quite apparent that the people were done with the traditional monarchies, and so the feudal relations of property became no longer compatible with the already developed productive forces, the bourgeoisie. So the land that the king owned was becoming in conflict with the land that these private businesses, these bourgeois, were also occupying. So there had this inevitably would have is going to lead to conflict. That's what he's saying here. It's like a almost deterministic, because he says they had to be burst asunder, and they were burst asunder. And again, using the French Revolution as the example of that, that would have been very fresh in his mind, because when he was writing the Communist Manifesto, the French Revolution was only 50 years ago. So really not that far. All right. So this is the second half of the, or not the second half, sorry, it's in three groups. So this is the second chapter, which he entitled The Proletarians and the Communists. And so what this second chapter is dedicated to is basically saying, see, I told you all the issues that you're having with capitalism. Under the bourgeoisie, you're being worked to death, you're not getting fair wage, and what's worse is you're actually being stolen from, because Marx viewed the worker getting paid is not the same as what the factory owner is going to make in addition to. So Marx didn't like the fact that when a business owner paid his employees, it was not to the proportion of which the owner himself made a profit on either the service or the product. He saw that as theft. Even though that's necessary for a business to keep going, because you have to pay people's health insurance and all that stuff. So you need to make more money than you are paying your workers. Otherwise, you're not going to have a company. But again, Marx saw that as theft, and that's just what he believed. But this is his solution. This is him saying, we the communists, we hear you. We got you. Workers, come to us. So this is what he's saying here. In relation do the communists, in what relation do the communists stand to the proletarians as a whole? So you say, what can we give them? The communists do not form a separate party opposed to the other working class parties. They have no interests, the communists, they have no interests separate and apart from those of the proletariat as a whole. So he's saying everything you guys want to do, hey, we got your back. They do not set up any sectarian principles of their own by which to shape and mold the proletarian movement. So he's saying, hey, if you choose us, we're not going to mess with you. We're not going to make you change. We're not going to tell you need to start, we're not going to influence you in any way. What you guys are already doing, keep doing that. So he's making communism very palatable to the workers because they don't have to change anything. So that's what he's doing here. The communists are distinguished from the other working class parties by this only. So he's setting himself apart. Why? How is communism going to help them when the other working class parties are failing? So number one, he says the national struggles of the proletarians of the different countries. So communism doesn't just care about the people in this country. We care about all the workers in all the countries. So that's what's making us different. They point out and bring to the front the common interests, the entire proletariat, independently of all nationality. So, number one can be summarized: we're international. We don't just have immediate interests, we also have the interests of other people. So that's how they're setting themselves apart from other working class parties. And number two, in the various stages of development which the struggle of the working class against the bourgeoisie has to pass through, they always and everywhere represent the interests of the movement as a whole. So he's saying we'll never stray. We're not going to stray from the movement, guys. Your mission is also our mission. So again, kind of reiterating that we're not going to change you if you choose to vote for us. We're not going to say that you need to be doing anything differently other than what you're already doing. He's making it as palatable as possible, right? Spoonful of sugar and all that. And so he goes on, and this is more of him selling communism. And these are just various quotes from the second chapter here. In this sense, the theory of the communists may be summed up in a single sentence: abolition of private property. That is the heart of what it is that the socialists are trying to do, again, because they believe property itself to be capital. Capital is therefore not a personal, it is a social power. When therefore capital is converted into common property, into the property of all members of society, so redistribution, this is the proletariat taking over, personal property is not thereby transformed into social property. So he's saying, if your toothbrush, your blanket, that that's your property. So he's making a distinction between, you're going to hear communists, maybe they'll nitpick and be like, well, that's personal property, that's not private property. And they play this semantic word game to throw you off. And this is where they're getting that from. Like your house, right? That's private property, but your toothbrush, that's personal property. And it's really arbitrary where they draw the lines of distinction between the two. It's really just kind of um, Schrodinger's communist. It really depends on what communist you're talking to, and you'll get a different answer as to what is personal and private property. But the example that they'll use is, the property that your house is on, land, and your toothbrush. All right, last paragraph here. Um, Communism deprives no man of the power to appropriate the products of society. So he's saying, everything you need, you're going to get. And he's saying the only downside to communism, all that it does is deprive him of the power to subjugate the labor of others, capitalism, bourgeoisie, by the means of such appropriation. So he's saying, the only thing that communism does is just rob you of the ability to exploit people. But what's your problem, guys? That's all we're going to do. So again, he's making communism very digestible, and he truly believes this stuff. Over 170 years later, we now know the consequences of this type of thinking. But that's not all that the communists want to do. Okay, so we got sort of the introduction, and we've got our foundation built on Marxism, and so now we're going to jump into socialism. So what is socialism exactly? And I touched on this at the very beginning, under those definitions, and maybe I went a little bit too far, but socialism, let's start with what it is not, because that's important. It is not a system of regimented individuals, subordinate or coercive to state apparatus. So the state, what it is there, the system's going to be overturned completely. Like the way that we understand state relations between the state and the individual is going to be completely different. Which we know that after, like I said, the Soviet Union, we know that to be true. Socialist countries are just nothing but bureaucracy. But definitionally, what communism is not, this is what we're focusing on. So It's also not just simple welfare, and also like Marxism, it's not just taxation, it's not social spending or social safety nets, because all those things within a liberal democracy are being funded by tax revenue generated by capitalism. So that's why those things are not socialist. Um, they're not a seizure of the means of something, right? They're just added programs for people that are genuinely destitute. Socialism also is not the final stage, theoretically. It is, to the socialist, it is only a transitory phase. It does not represent full communism. So that's how they can play kind of these two games, because they'll say, well, in order for us to get to a stateless, classless society, we first have to consolidate everything to the state. We have to have an absolute state first, and then it will become communism at some point. And neither Engels or Marx really offer any definitive uh, idea or image of what that even would look like. And we'll get into that later. So, what socialism is. It is the abolition of private property, like we just heard Marx say, and I've already kind of beaten that to a hard beaten dead horse at this sort of point where they believe capital is property. So that's how they believe. It is the seizure of the means of production, and I talked about this giving the Venezuela and the oil example. That is the seizure of the means of production. That is genuine socialism. So Venezuela is socialist, and so is any country that where the state owns the means of production of something, and it can be anything. It doesn't have to be oil. It can be steel. It can be electricity. It can be whatever it is. If the state owns it and runs it, that's socialism. Um, Centralized planned economy. So ideally, for the socialist, every commodity would be would have their means seized by the state, ideally, and have everything from food production to making cars to whatever it is, any mode of production. The socialist wants that to be centrally focused, because they view it right now. They view capitalism and the markets as being too volatile. It's too unstable, and they're right about that. Right? We saw capitalism is prone to both recessions and depressions, because the market is volatile. You don't know what it's going to do. And so they do have a point. But their solution is a complete aggregation of all those things under one single entity. And we know how that goes. It always leads to an oligarchy. So that is what socialism is and is not. So you're going to hear part of the transitionary state between capitalism and communism is what's called the dictatorship of the proletariat. And what that is the dictatorship of the proletariat is now that the proletariat has become its own ruling class. And I'm just going to go ahead and read what I've written. So, again, they believe that history progresses through material progress. So Marx posits that socialism is a necessary phase to advance material progress, as capitalism's inherent contradictions, the fact that it does produce a hierarchy, it does produce winners and losers. So Marx saw that as a contradiction. He didn't think that any modes of production should produce disparate outcomes, which is equity, right? Which is, we hear people talking about equity all the time. That is a Marxist conception. So inherent contradictions eventually fetter or restrict or shackles the productive forces, late stage capitalism. So basically, capitalism is getting to this point where we're reaching the next point at which, just as the bourgeoisie overthrew the feudalism, it burst asunder, and he said it needed to burst asunder. Well, Marx is saying, well, that's happening again, but it's happening to the bourgeoisie this time. And he even says that capitalism is being injured by its own tools, the people that they employ, right? They're the ones who are going to overthrow them. So by making this working class, Marx argues, well, you're also constructing your own suicide by doing that. That's what Marx believed. So his solution to that, to prevent capitalism from just getting out of control, and now we just have a dystopia where everyone is either they have everything or the other people have absolutely nothing. His solution was to take over, seize the reins. To solve the crisis, the working class must seize the state power by revolutionary force, and he's not saying he was very much for violent revolution. Okay, both Marx and Engels are explicit in that the revolution needs to be done through violent means. Um, so establishing a transitional dictatorship of the proletariat, again, where the proletariat becomes ruling class. And I'll just read the quotes here. The first step in the revolution, so the very first thing we got to do if we're going to take control of this machine that's out of control, this capitalist, this just keeps producing, and it's a machine that is getting worse the more time is allowed it. So the working class is to rise, the proletariat, the worker, in a position of the ruling class to win the battle of democracy. Again, socialists use the word democracy differently. They don't mean what you and I mean when we vote for a representative, and that representative then goes and casts a vote on our behalf. That's not what they mean. When they say democracy, they mean direct control by the people themselves. It's a one person, one vote. Each person it represents themselves. That's what they mean by democracy. So the communists disdain to conceal their views and aims. So he's saying we're done, pretending that we don't think this. This is what we believe. So he's saying the communists hate concealing their views and aims. They openly declare that their ends can be attained only by the forcible overthrow of all existing social conditions. This is, we need to wipe the floor clean. We got to start all over again, and we have to start at zero. And we know this to be true because in Cambodia, the Khmer Rouge, when they took over, what did they do? They established year zero. This is what communists do. They did this in China also. China is thousands of years old. They had, the terracotta soldiers. They had dynasties that, covered most of China for thousands of years. The communists destroyed it all. So the China, the country today, is a brand new country. It has nothing to do with the dynasties, back before Mao took over. China, as it is today, is a brand new country. It's only 90 years old because when Mao took over, he erased everything. Mm-hmm. So that's where the communists get this from, is this total, we need to destroy everything and start over. This is just more quotations on this process of the dictator of the proletariat and how it's supposed to work. And I'll just read it. Of course, in the beginning, this cannot be effected except by means of despotic inroads and the roads of property. Again, going back to, we can't do this unless we seize property and the conditions of the bourgeois production. So we need to take their production from them. The proletariat will use its political supremacy to wrest by degrees all capital, property, from the bourgeoisie to centralize all instruments of production, everything. This is farming. This is manufacturing. This is anything material, anything produced by people. That is instruments of production in the hands of the state, us, the dictatorship of the proletariat. We're taking all that stuff, i.e. the proletariat organized as the ruling class. The proletariat established itself as the ruling class by overthrowing everything, and they take everything from the bourgeoisie. That's his solution. The immediate aim of the communist is the same as all the other proletarian parties. So he's saying, though, our missions are aligned, guys. Formation of the proletariat into its own class, because right now it's kind of, he's arguing that, Marx argues that capitalism did not get rid of feudalism, it just kind of changed it. So now there's no longer a serf or a slave and an aristocracy per se, but that model is being played out in the economy. So he's saying that the spirit of feudalism didn't really go away, it just transferred into the bourgeois, and the bourgeois, they changed what feudalism was by exploiting the worker. So there's still that master slave distinction. That's what is being said here. Overthrow of the bourgeoisie, supremacy, conquest of political power by the proletariat. So we understand now what it is. His solution is and how it's supposed to be done. So now let's get to communism. What it is the theoretical utopian society where everything is not done based on monetary gain, but it's done based on people's needs. So what communism is not state-centric, because it argues, Engels specifically argues that the absolute state formed under the dictator of the proletariat, that once they have aggregated everything, um, that it will just wither away. And that's a direct quote from Engels, that the state, at some point, it will see no need for itself anymore. It, an absolute state with absolute power will somehow just internally critique itself suddenly and go, you know what, guys? I don't think they need us anymore. And then it'll just wither away. That's what these communists believe, these classical Marxists. That's what they believe. Not necessarily the neo-Marxists believe that because they operate off of a different philosophy, but this is what Engels and Marx taught, that at some point, after ceding everything to the state, that the state will just go away at some point. And there's no, again, no empirical evidence to ever suggest that would ever be a possibility in any reality. But you have to believe this stuff if you want to be a Marxist. So it's not wage labor, because under capitalism there is no money. It's not a system where individuals are paid for labor hours, which Marx called, I think, was it relative capital? Um, there is no money or commodity to exchange because everyone is just doing things based on need, not profit. So it's not state capitalism. Again, it is, communism is to be international. So it's supposed to be worldwide. Again, going back to, the Communist Party is different in that we're interested in, and we worry about all workers everywhere, not just our country. So let's go ahead and get into what communism is. It is a state and classless society where people are self-governing, they have free association, and they just, when something needs to be built or made, they just collectively get together and then just make it. Let's just say we need a school. Communists will say, well, people will just, because it's for the common interest based on needs, that the community will just get together magically and just build schools. Like they'll just know what it is that they need, and they'll just build it. That's Marxist theory. So again, we jumped a little bit ahead, but distribution by need. Allocation of resources is based on from each according to his ability to each according to his need. And I meant to describe that saying at the beginning because it's at the first slide. What that means is people are going to do things according to what they're able to do, according to what they need. Now, of course, this saying is being viewed from the lens of the belief that communism, that the economy is what forms human nature. That once the material conditions are ideal, once they've been properly allocated and redistributed, that will fundamentally change human nature. And instead of doing things based on profit, we'll just naturally become the socialist man, and we'll just do things based according to need. So it is this theoretical kind of fantasy where he believes that human nature, due to the changing of economic modes of production, that human nature will change itself and become based what it is he's saying, from each according to their ability, each according to their need. Never mind the fact that one's ability is very finite. Even if you go into the medical industry, you have a doctor. They don't just specialize in the human body, but they don't treat it. Everyone is specialized. Like you have a doctor, an endocrine doctor, for example. They only focus on the endocrine glands, and that's really all they really know the full details of. They may know more than the average person of, like, let's just say the human body in general, but they really specialize. Their main ability is in the endocrine system. But your needs are constant. Everyone needs water all the time. Everyone needs food all the time. Everyone needs housing all the time. And so when this saying meets, when the tires meet the road of reality, this model doesn't work at all. Because like I said, human beings have an infinite demand. for needs, but the pool of ability is very small. It really is. I mean, for me, it took 30 years before I was useful for anybody. You know, you don't just uh, you're not just born ready to do things. It takes a long time, and in that time, you need a lot of things. Um, yeah, that's how I'll describe that. Common ownership, everything is collectively owned. You know, no one owns a farm. We all collectively own it. And we just do on the farm what it is based on whatever need needs to be currently met. That's communism. And I'll read the quote here. In a higher phase of communist society, society can inscribe on its banners from each according to its ability to each according to his needs. So that's like his anthem. That's the thing that he's really like. I am sure he thought he was really clever when he came up with this. You know, he was just really proud of it. And so he's saying, well, yeah, once communism's been built, they're going to wave my flag. That's kind of arrogant, if you ask me. So this is more on what Marx had to say on this theoretical uh, utopian society. When in the course of development, class distinctions have disappeared, we're classless, and all production has been concentrated in the hands of the vast association of the whole nation. So the proletariat, everyone is just we all own the collective means of production because land has been distributed, so therefore we all are have the ability to do capital, but the capital is now needs, not profit. The public power will lose its political character. Next quote, in proportion as the exploitation of one individual by another will also be put to an end. Again, he saw employment. Someone hires you for a job and they're not paying you as much as they are making from the profit they're getting from the person hiring to do the job. That is exploitation, according to a communist. So the exploitation of one nation by another. So he's saying, you know, this isn't just localized to a single country. This is international. That we're communism is going to come to everything. Um, one nation by another will also be put to an end in proportion as the antagonism between classes within the nation vanishes. And this is every nation. The hostility of one nation to one another will also come to an end. So he's saying this is world peace. This is utopia. This is quite literally nowhere, because that's what utopia translates to. So it's quite literally nowhere. So all of this, again, title that the Communist Manifesto had was the Communist Confession of Faith. All of this stuff, it reads like, you know, a prophet from the Bible. That he's giving an end time, end of history, what things will be like once we have done enough struggle. We have furthered the dialectic to the point to where all conflicts, all contradictions have been resolved, and now all that there is just doing things communally for one another. We've risen above the bourgeois distinction between modes of production being tied to property, and now it has been given to everybody. And so, well, once we all have equal power, he's arguing, well, then we won't have a reason to war with one another because we're all equal. So this is a form of egalitarian, or it is like egalitarianism. Okay, so I've been talking for quite a bit, and there is a chance that I missed something. Maybe I went over something too quickly. I didn't explain something well enough, or maybe I just flat out forgot to explain something. But I do want to review. So, what Marxism is, it is historical materialism viewed exclusively through class struggle. That is the class struggle that is Marx's version of the dialectic, that thing that is driving history forward. Class struggle and revolutions drive history forward, which is why he was so inspired by the French Revolution. Production, democratization of the workforce. Again, democratization is one-to-one, it's direct ownership, and the abolition of private property, the complete seizure of the thing that makes capital itself, and centralized economic planning. Communism, the theoretical stateless classless society, once the state, socialism, realizes its redundancy. And I'm not kidding here. I'm not kidding when I say that Engels argued that the state that has absolute power will just end itself. It'll wither away and just relinquish its power onto the people. This is fantasy, you guys. This is what a classical Marxist believes. Um, and this is all faith based. So when I say that Marxism, communism is a faith, it is. It's a religious faith. I call it a materialist it's a materialist religion, what I call it, because it does have axiomatic beliefs that you have to believe in, just like in the beginning God made the heavens and the earth. So who is Hegel? Hegel was deeply influential. You cannot describe Marx really and what he believed without knowing a little bit about Hegel and what his absolute idealism is, his view of history, his teleological view. He was trying to determine what the purpose of history itself was. And this was all done what he called via the dialectic. So with that, I am going to end it and open it up for Q&A.